This week on the Tech ONTAP podcast, we kick off Data Protection Series as we discuss some use cases for data protection with NetApp.
Welcome to the Tech ONTAP podcast with Justin Parisi, Glenn Sizemore, and Sully the Monster.
I love NetApp. Oh, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Tech ONTAP podcast. My name is Justin Parisi, and I'm doing this show all by myself today. Andrew and Glenn are not in the studio or on WebEx, but we do have some data protection folks on the WebEx for failover capabilities, of course. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a high-level overview of data protection as it pertains to NetApp and how we can do that for you in your storage environments. And to do that, we've brought in a couple of guests here. Nadathur.
I'm the Director of Product Management and Technical Marketing, been here with NetApp for 8+ years, and I'm focused on all things data protection with fast ONTAP.
And Sid, what about yourself? How long have you been here at NetApp? What do you do here? And can we find you on social media?
Yes. Hi, Justin. So I'm Siddharth. I'm a technical marketing engineer with NetApp's data protection team for ONTAP. I've been working on SnapLock and then recently started working on SnapMirror, SnapVault stuff. Have been here 2 years. It's pretty exciting. So yeah, thanks for having me. People can find me on Twitter at Siddhartha that's my first name, and A145. That's my handle.
All right, and we'll add that to the show notes in case you didn't get that on the podcast. So this episode is going to kick off a series of data protection episodes. We actually had a person email us at podcast@netapp.com, and you could do that as well if you like, if you have show suggestions or questions. But they emailed us and they asked us about if what we're doing with data protection, if we have any updates since the last data protection episode, and he was right. I mean, we don't have anything since then. So we're going to start off with a high-level overview of what NetApp is doing currently with data protection solutions, as well as how it ties into the data fabric. And then we'll go into other series episodes later on, going into more detail. But today is going to be high-level. We're going to cover some use cases. And to kick it all off, let's talk about the bread and butter, if you would, of ONTAP and in data protection, the snapshot. So who wants to take on the snapshot use case?
Sure, I can go over. As we all know, with snapshot technology, it has been there with NetApp and with ONTAP for such a long time. It is basically a point-in-time copy technology, which provides you with instant data copies. So you have your file system, and then you can keep taking snapshots on a volume level to provide these point-in-time copies. And you can then store them, replicate them in case of backup or in case of DR, to avoid storage failover.
What you said is right. With snapshots, you can do instant recoveries on your primary. Any operational errors, any operational things that you have can all be done from a snapshot. And you can also go back in time and reapply your snapshot and make it as a primary. I mean, this technology has been there pretty much since the age of time with fast and ONTAP, and you see everybody else doing pretty much the same thing today.
All right, excellent. So snapshots are a good way of protecting your data. That said, there is often a religious argument of whether a snapshot is truly a backup. Would one of you like to tackle that?
Sure. Is snapshot truly a backup? It depends. If your snapshot is based off your primary data set, like the technology that we use, you essentially are saying, hey, along with the copy of new blocks that are there, you also require your primary data to be made available to look at a snapshot. And that's why, as I said, snapshot is a good way of looking at your data for operational recovery. Whenever you are in need of a copy of your data, a virtual for protecting your primary, that's where either you can mirror your primary or you can create backups of your primary, and those all can be done very efficiently using NetApp technologies. So you can create copies of data for the purpose of backup or DR, and that's as easy as creating a snapshot.
Okay. So as far as backups go, I mean, we can move on to another data protection piece of the puzzle, and really this isn't a backup thing; it's more of a business continuity thing. So let's move on to Metro Cluster. So this is another NetApp feature that we have available for data protection use cases. And if Anand, if you want to go into what Metro Cluster is and how it applies to the data protection portion of NetApp's portfolio.
Absolutely. So Metro Cluster, as the name suggests, allows you to have high availability between two clusters, two NetApp ONTAP clusters. You have the high availability within a cluster, and that's why you can, where you can fail over between one node and the partner node takes care. Now, if you want to have two different sites, and the sites could be as far as 300 kilometers, and you want the high availability between these two sites, and that's exactly where Metro Cluster fits in. It could be far, or it could be within a campus, say less than 20 meters between two floors. You could have a setup where one complete cluster fails over and the other cluster takes care of everything. So all your data points move from one side to another side, is available readily on the other side. We mirror every piece of data point from one side to another side. That way you have copies available on both sides. And if in case of a disaster or in case of a need that you want to fail over to the other side, you do a complete storage failover to the other side and data is instantly available for you. So your applications which are looking on the primary side can now start looking onto the secondary side, and they say, hey, data is there instantaneously. And Metro Cluster is connected with or tightly integrated with some of the applications. For example, it's integrated with VMware. So that way, when you fail over to the other side, you have availability of all the VMs on the other side. It's integrated with Microsoft Always-On technology. So when your SQL server goes from one side to another side, again, you have availability on the other side for all the integrated databases with SQL. So Metro Cluster, in essence, provides you business continuity and make sure that your data is available on the other side. That's kind of one of the key tenets of data protection is data should be available for you always.
Yeah, and it essentially is a stretch cluster, right? It's an HA pair that's stretched across, or more than an HA pair, like an entire cluster in some cases, like multiple nodes on one site, multiple nodes on the other site, and the ability to fail over to the other site in the event of a disaster or an outage. One of the most popular uses we see with Metro Cluster is in Europe, with the regions and being able to have the distance work out in their favor because they're not as spread far apart as a lot of companies are in America. Like sometimes you have a company in LA, sometimes you have a company in New York, and there's no way you're going to be able to get that distance to work out in your favor for Metro Cluster because it's just too far, and the distance considerations have to do with the amount of time it takes to be able to commit writes in the event of a disaster, right?
Absolutely, that's right. So distance is one thing, and the configurations are the other pieces. You mentioned stretch cluster. So Metro Cluster is available in all different flavors: 2-node, a 4-node, 8-node, where you could have 4 nodes on each side is what we call an 8-node cluster. You could have 8 nodes on each side, so 16-node cluster. You could have just 1 node on each side, and that's a 2-node cluster. And in that 2-node configuration, you could have a single cluster stretched across. So those are different configurations that are there. So it gives you the flexibility to choose what exactly you want, and it gives you that availability. There are a lot of places where you just want to go, as I said earlier, between 2 floors, right? And there are a lot of times customers have systems across very short distances. Europe is a predominantly a nice place where you see these kind of situations. Unlike the US, where somebody would say, I want to go from East Coast to West Coast, you find shorter distances pretty much there in Europe.
And Anand, even in US, we have, for example, in California, since it's an earthquake-prone zone, we see a lot of customers are using this for that sort of use case. Or if in case one of your labs gets flooded, then you can always use the equipment in the other lab to fail over. So just to add to that.
So along that same vein, we also have something called SVM DR, and this kind of ties us in between business continuity as well as asynchronous DR. So let's talk about SVM DR before we go into asynchronous DR. So what are some of the benefits to having an SVM DR set up?
Yeah. So one of the key things around SVM DR is all about tenant level DR. SVMs are storage virtual machines, allow you to look at a single fast system as multiple fast systems by providing tenant level capabilities, right? So that's where you can create as high as 1,000 SVMs within a single fast system. For folks who've come from the virtualization world, this is nothing but storage virtualization, right? Now, once you have created an SVM and you've given it a certain protocol, a set of storage, and made it available to your application, when your application fails over to the other side, you want to make sure that your storage is also failing over to the other side. Now, if you were to do it more granularly, then you will have to make sure you got all the bits and pieces available. Now, when you're doing it at SVM level, your SVM will take care of all the contents within that SVM. So you could have a set of protocols for your log files. You could have a set of protocols for some of your other data files that are there. They all will be, as part of the SVM DR, made available on the DR side. And that replication happens behind the scenes for you. And when you do an SVM DR, they are available to you on the other side. An SVM DR is also storage efficient transportation mechanism. It uses that mechanism. So that way, if you have efficiency built on your primary side, when you go to the secondary side, you have all those efficiently available on the other side. So the key benefit is, if you're thinking of a whole pack of things within an SVM, it's easy to migrate that complete container onto the other side using SVM DR.
Okay, so that's another way of doing sort of a business continuity piece without having the instantaneous failover that you'd have with Metro Cluster. And with SVM DR, you have the capability to fail over non-disruptively in some cases. For example, if I have NFS mounts, I can set the preserve file handle to be true, and then have the same IP addresses assigned to the SVM DR instance. And as they carry over to the disaster recovery site, when we have a failover, we don't have any disruption in service. So we get pretty seamless, non-disruptive failovers of our SVMs at volume granular levels if needed.
Absolutely. So there are two capabilities, one called Identity Preserve, and as Justin, you said, when you use Identity Preserve, you maintain those handles, you maintain those configurations, and they are available access on the secondary side. So your apps don't need to change anything at all.
And beyond that use case, we also have seen this in the past with just 7-mode systems. We can use disaster recovery destinations as test environments or as backup and recovery pieces, right? So we can use the SVM DR as a testing test bed by keeping all of the configurations from the source piece and the volumes that we have over there and bringing them over to the destination side and develop and do flex clones and that sort of thing on the destination, as opposed to having to work on that production system, which may take up valuable resources that we're using in production.
That's absolutely right, Justin. So there's a slick way of using SVM DR. You could go on to a test dev site on a remote location, create a replica there, and then once you break the relationship, you can do what you want on the other side, or as you said, you could clone and create another copy and then work off on the other side. So there are different ways in which you could do it. What's applicable generally for a more granular container like a volume is made available for a complete SVM. So that's the simplicity of using SVM DR.
Okay, so we have the asynchronous capabilities of SVM DR, which can do things disruptively or non-disruptively as you like. So now let's move into asynchronous DR, which includes SnapMirror. So Sid, if you could, give us a kind of high-level overview of what SnapMirror does for us.
Sure, yeah. SnapMirror, as we discussed, Metro Cluster, which provides you with the synchronous capabilities. SnapMirror provides you with the asynchronous DR capability to provide you with the business continuity across a sort of broad spectrum of recovery point and recovery time objectives, which is your RPO and RTO. So with SnapMirror, you can reduce your network bandwidth by almost 70% with all the efficiency technologies which we have with compression and dedupe and stuff. It provides you with so much of product simplicity with lower management overhead. And then you can use the same technology in order to either replicate on site or to go to the cloud and provide you with hybrid cloud data protection. That's sort of an overview of what SnapMirror can do. It's a very powerful technology which we have in ONTAP.
So there's some enhancements to SnapMirror we've had in the recent years that kind of improve upon it. So I know that one of the enhancements that I'm fond of is the version-independent SnapMirror. So if you could give us a little bit of detail about how that works and what it does and what it buys us.
Sure. So we launched something called SnapMirror Unified Replication in ONTAP 8.3. So it has been there for a long time. And for the folks who are familiar with the replication technologies of block replication versus logical replication, so that's what we are trying to promote in the field and encouraging customers to use logical replication, because we are trying to get to that point where everyone becomes part of data fabric. And that's where that unified replication comes into picture. So with SnapMirror unified replication, with the same baseline, with a single baseline, you can achieve both DR and backup scenario. And the other thing which it provides you with is the version flexible replication. So earlier we had this restriction where your primary or your secondary system has to be on the same ONTAP release or higher ONTAP release as your source. But with version flexible, that restriction is no longer there. So you can your destination system can be either on a lower ONTAP release or on a higher ONTAP release amongst the supported releases, and you can do your failover or your replication from your source to destination.
Yeah, and one benefit of that is that if you are a storage administrator, you don't have to coordinate upgrades across multiple data centers at one time, right?
Exactly.
I don't have to take an entire weekend to do my upgrades, because now I know that I can do the destination site first if I want to, and then the source one later, and not have to worry about if I'm going to be able to fail over in the event of a disaster with that time frame. So that's the key benefit of version independent. But what it also does, the unified SnapMirror engine, is it combines the mirror and the vault like you talked about. So one thing that came out of that is something called Mirror Vault. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So we have these. We have always had these two separate products earlier, right? SnapMirror for your data, for your disaster recovery, and SnapVault for backup, right? And then we got this sort of feedback from the field that why do you need two separate baselines in order to have DR and backup? So that's where that innovation came from. And that's when we came up with this mirror vault policy, in which case with a single baseline on the same volume, you can have your snapshots, which are meant for disaster recovery, which is mirror, and the vault piece where you can have snapshots which are meant for the backup purposes, which can be retained for longer, as long as 7 year with your unified 7-year policy. So that's what it provides you with. With a single baseline, you reduce your sort of your bandwidth by 50%, because that same baseline is providing you with both backup and DR.
Yeah, and the reason that you do that is because the key difference between mirrors and vaults is that mirrors are exact copies of your source, which means that includes the snapshots, so 1-to-1. And whereas vault, I can keep extra snapshots around if I need to and keep them longer.
Yes, you can have your critical snapshot copies on your primary system, and you, for example, for 30 days, your daily copies. And if you want to have longer weekly or monthly or yearly snapshot copies, you can put them on your secondary system.
Okay, so the SnapVault piece covers one of the backup functionality portions of NetApp and the portfolio. What other backup solutions do we have available to us in the data protection realm?
So taking it a step further, you can use the same technology, and we have integration with another product line called AltaVault, right? So with SnapVault, you can have either disk to disk backups or disk to tape or even disk to cloud. So for disk to disk, you can use unified replication to replicate these copies, these snapshot copies from one system to the another, or you can use AltaVault and send these copies either to ONTAP Cloud, and then we have another feature on ONTAP called Fabric Pool, which you can use to tier that data onto the third-party cloud storage. I'm sure Anand has more points to add to that.
If you're taking data to the cloud, which is kind of every single CIO's request or mandate to make use of cloud from a cloud economics perspective, you certainly can take data from ONTAP on-prem and go to the cloud to ONTAP cloud. At the same time, you want to go to multiple clouds and want to have the ability to use third-party traditional backup vendor applications. We have AltaVault, which also works with the existing ONTAP framework. And as Sid said, you could go to an AltaVault, which allows you to keep cache data for, say, 30 days on-prem, and then after that automatically creates a copy in the cloud. So you can go to cloud, use an AltaVault virtual, and restore data from there. So those are two easy ways of going to the cloud. And at the same time, using AltaVault, you need not necessarily go to a public cloud like an Amazon. You can go to a private cloud. You can create an object cloud using storage grid, NetApp storage grid. So that way, your data is still residing on 3 different sites. You have the ability to recover from any point within your spread it enterprise. So those are easy ways of going to the cloud using the current ONTAP mechanisms.
So what are some of the benefits of going to the cloud? I mean, I know we can do migration or data protection to the cloud. Why would I want to do that to begin with?
Yeah, good question, Percy, because when people say I want to make use of cloud for cloud economics, what they really mean is this, right? I do most of my recoveries in the first 60 days. After 60 days, if I'm going to really recover, I'm willing to pay a slightly higher SLA. I'm okay if it comes back within 4 hours. But in the first 60 days, I probably want it instantaneously. Since it is more than 4 hours, for example, right, you want to keep it in a place where it is less costly. Right, and that's exactly why customers want to push data out, keep it in a place where it is less costly. So cost certainly is one of the primary reasons. Second is data, if it is kept on-premise, and that's kind of what we are seeing from a market trend perspective, keeping data on-premise is ending up being cost, ending up being more space, ending up needing a lot of other stuff to keep data on-premise. That's where the archiving use case also comes into picture. There are a lot of files and a lot of data within your environment that you probably are not utilizing, and those all could be kept in a place where they could have a higher SLA, right? If you haven't touched a file in the last 10 years, do you really want to keep that particular file on-premise? You'd rather keep it in a place where it is less costlier. So you can archive old files, so that would be the other benefit of going to the cloud is you could directly go and keep the data there, right? And take it when it is needed. And finally, you can think of it as place where if you are really looking at the cloud as a place to do your off-prem development, a lot of third platform born in the cloud applications require you to keep data in the cloud because it's easy to get compute in the cloud. Think of Amazon. You can easily spin up a VM in Amazon within a fraction of time as opposed to getting physical hardware here. So when you move data off to the cloud, then you can create a compute instance and instantaneously start making use of the data. Think of analytics in the cloud. So for those use cases, you want to create a copy in the cloud, and that's another reason why outside of the traditional backup and archive, customers would want to move data to the cloud so they can do development in the cloud where it's a spin-up, spin-down model, and it's very cost-effective.
Are we able to do SVM DR into ONTAP Cloud to do sort of that failover or that, not the failover, but the dev instance so we can actually create different IP addresses but use the same data?
Yes, we are headed down that path. That's something that we have not fully tested and validated today, but that's certainly one of the use cases that we want to enable, because within the ONTAP framework, it doesn't matter where your ONTAP is and what type of ONTAP it is. It's running on what platform. So that is something that we'd be able to make sure is available for customers to use in a reasonable time frame.
Okay. We talked about cloud and we talked about backups and why people would want to use the cloud. What if I want to use the cloud for compliance, or what if I want to just use compliance in general in NetApp storage? How would I do compliance with my data protection feature functionality?
That's a great question, Justin. So we have a product called SnapLock on ONTAP. So that's the first feature which I worked on when I joined NetApp, and I'm still working on that because we have a lot of exciting features coming up for SnapLock in our future releases. And I'm sure we'll cover them later in the other podcasts. But yes, SnapLock is the answer for that. If you have any compliant data or if you have to fulfill any governance or any compliance regulations, you need to have SnapLock. And that's just a flick of a switch. It's a feature on ONTAP. All you have to do is just create another aggregate of type SnapLock, and you can start putting your data there. Once you put it there, nobody can go ahead and delete or modify or do any funny stuff with that data. So we have a lot of customers from healthcare sector, from financial sector, who have to fulfill compliance regulations, such as your SEC 17A4 from Security and Exchange Commission, or you guys might have heard of HIPAA for healthcare. So these sort of compliance regulations, when you have to fulfill them, that's where SnapLock comes into picture. And we have two flavors of it, SnapLock Enterprise and SnapLock Compliance. So we see a lot of customers who don't have to fulfill these compliance regulations, but they just want to use these kind of features for risk mitigation, right? If you want to store your employee records, or if insurance agency has to store the data for their customers based on the different retention periods, they can use SnapLock Enterprise, where an administrator is allowed to go ahead and delete that data before the retention period expires in order to reclaim that space. For example, if I switch my provider, if I change to a different guy, then they might want to delete that data after certain years. So yeah, for fulfilling those sort of use cases, we have SnapLock.
Okay, so are you seeing a lot of demand for doing compliance like SnapLock in the cloud, or are people keeping that sort of data on premises?
Not yet, because when it comes to compliance data, regulators or auditors, they don't trust you to keep your data with the third-party storage. So based on the use case, currently we are not seeing that, but it doesn't mean that we are not working on that. In the background, we have to be up to date with what can be there in the future. So we are always sort of on our toes to be there in the market when the need is there. So yes, we are always thinking of the use cases which can be there sort of 5 years in the future or 10 years in the future. But currently, SnapLock is not there on the cloud. But when it is needed, I'm sure we'll be there.
Yeah, so compliance as a need in a, should I say, shared cloud-like environment is certainly the direction of the future. So customers are today asking us if we could have compliance as available to different groups within the enterprise. As Sid said, the need for compliance is coming both from a regulatory purpose as well as from a enterprise requirement. You want to keep data for some period of time, and after that period of time, you want to delete it. As Sid said, when an employee leaves an organization, you want to keep his data for some period of time. So that data, after an employee is left, need not necessarily be on in your data center drives. It could be in a shared location where you want to archive data and keep, and that could be your private cloud. So this need for keeping compliance data in the cloud has to be within the larger framework of what is available as GDPR. Where can I keep up data? Is it within the same locale, within the same country? So once those are all set up, then you would see the need for compliance data being in a public cloud-like environment. But the need for making sure compliance is available as a service, as a capability within an enterprise, it's pretty huge. And looking at all the functionality that SnapLock provides today, like lock management or worm, we are there to provide all those functionalities to enterprises today.
So as far as compliance goes, I mean, we have SnapLock and the ability to either lock it down from a compliance perspective with a clock, or the enterprise level where we can actually do storage administrators setting the clock and being able to manage that from their own storage administrator buckets, right? They don't have to worry about dealing with the clock that they have to wait to expire. So, we can do compliance and we can lock things down, but keeping stuff around that long can take up space and take up money, especially when we're doing it all on-prem. How are we solving the problem of keeping data around for long periods of time and trying to save customers money with that particular data set?
Yeah, so I think this is exactly why we have gone around and started to create a solution called Data Protection Bundle. What it initially does today is it allows you to consolidate your different backup targets and your different mirror targets into one single platform. And today it's available with the FAS 8200 platform, and eventually it will start supporting other platforms as well. As Sid mentioned earlier, we talked about SnapMirror unified replication. One of the primary purposes of that capability is to have a single stream sent out. And with that single stream, you save space on your target. You also save space as well as transmission cost because you're sending one single block. Now imagine this capability coming from multiple of those systems on the primary. You want to have an efficient system on the secondary, which is your target, to accommodate multiple connections, multiple fan-ins coming in from your different sources. It needs to provide better efficiency ratios, which needs to go beyond the current limits that we have. Those are kind of things that we have planned and will be made available as part of the data protection bundle. Now, in addition to just making sure that you got efficiency coming in this fashion, think of efficiency that you can derive when you are essentially replicating data from your primary system to your secondary system. We all know that most of the time, data that's being replicated from one side to another side, the working set is pretty small. The rest of the data that makes up the entire data that's being replicated is all about data that is either in snapshots or pretty much data that is there that you're not utilizing as part of your working set. That probably forms more than 60-70% of your data sets. If there is a way to make use of the same cloud economics to save space, then you have a powerful solution. And that's a solution we have today with what we are calling fabric pools. This allows you to make use of your cloud, could be a public cloud or could be even a private cloud for that matter, allows you to keep or tier blocks off to a lower cost storage. And that way it has all the metadata on your primary box. So you could think of doing a replication between an all-flash fast system and then another all-flash fast system, which is making use of fabric pool, but the target system need not be as beefy as your primary one. It could be a lightweight one, but it's making use of fabric pool and essentially making use of cloud economics to tier off data to the cloud. So that way you're saving on space, you're saving on cost, you're not having expensive SSDs sitting out there. So these are two ways in which customers can save on efficiency beyond just keeping everything in the cloud.
So as far as all this goes, I mean, how are we managing the data protection solutions? I mean, do we have something that can essentially manage this all together?
Yeah, there are two ways in which you can manage. NetApp has a solution called SnapCenter, which allows you to perform most of the operations that I mentioned, the ability to clone, the ability to backup. All these operations can be done from an application-centric perspective. The Snap Center product is essentially an evolution of the different Snap Manager products that were there available in the 7-mode time period as well as in the clustered ONTAP time period, right? And it's a single place from where you can create virtual copies of your VMs using the Snap Center plugin for VMware. It can create virtual copies of Oracle, SQL, Exchange, and SAP HANA. It can create multiple copies. It can manage your SnapMirror relationships. It can manage your SnapVault relationships. And at the same time, if you want to essentially take any of these copies and go to the cloud using AltaVault, it can manage that relationship as well. To begin with, Snap Center has just recently started to provide catalog and index information for data that's being sent to the cloud using AltaVault. Eventually, this functionality will be available for other use cases, but that's the primary use case it supports. With this basic functionality, think of what you get out of your traditional backup product. The ability to go from your primary data onto disk or to cloud with the need for catalog and index. That functionality is what Snap Center provides today. You will have that capability. Using that capability, you can go from a disk to a cloud, and you get the catalog and index that you need. So this is all managed using Snap Center. Now, NetApp is also tightly integrated with the traditional backup partners, the backup partners being Commvault, Veeam, Veritas, and CatLogic, and many others. So with these backup products, you have the ability to manage your traditional backups, and the traditional backups can be set on data that's residing on NetApp storage. And many of these partners have tight integration with SnapMirror and SnapVault, and they can manage your snapshot schedules, they can manage your SnapMirror updates, and they allow you to go between two fast systems. And that allows you to get the same benefits that you get from SnapMirror. In this case, it's all being managed by the backup partner, right? So you have two ways in which you can manage and orchestrate your complete data protection, one using Snap Center and one using your traditional backup products.
Any insight sessions worth looking into relating to data protection coming up for Insight in Vegas?
Absolutely. Sid is speaking on 2 sessions. Sid will provide you the details. We also have 2 sessions on MetroCluster, talking about MetroCluster technicals. And we have a Birds of Feather session, where we want to get a bunch of customers to talk about what are their key issues, and the customers are going to speak among themselves as to how they are accomplishing those tasks. And finally, we have a session that's going to talk about data protection in the data fabric and how all of these are connected in the data fabric.
Okay, and we'll include the session numbers in the show notes for the blog if you guys can hand those over to us.
Yes, I'll share these session details with you. Pretty excited about Insight Vegas and then Berlin. So I'll be taking a session on SnapMirror and then one on SnapLock. And we'll be talking about exciting features which are coming up in the next release of ONTAP.
Yeah.
All right.
And we also have a data protection booth, and we will be there in the booth. And if you have any follow-on questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
All right, sounds great. Okay, Anand and Sid, thanks so much for joining us today on the Tech on Tap podcast. If you are interested in other episodes that were related to what we talked about today, like I said, we're going to have some additional episodes on data protection in this series, but we also had some episodes on Snap Center. So episode 98 covers Snap Center 3.0. We also had episode 92 where we talked about Fabric Pool. So if you want to do a deep dive into Fabric Pool and learn a little bit more about that, feel free. And then in the future, we'll have episodes in depth on SnapMirror, SnapVault, SnapLock, and the like. Again, Anand and Sid, thanks for joining us. How do we get in touch with you?
Folks can reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is Siddharth, SIDDHARTHA145.
Okay, and Anand?
Yep, You can reach out to me via email, nadathur@netapp.com, and my Twitter handle is AnandGNA, so you can reach out in either one of these fashions.
All right, that music tells me it's time to go. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email to podcast@netapp.com or send us a tweet at NetApp. As always, if you'd like to subscribe, find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, or via TechOnTapPodcast.com. If you like the show today, leave us a review. On behalf of the entire Tech on Tap podcast team, I'd like to thank Anand, Nadathur, and Sid Agrawal for joining us this week. Thanks for listening.
Oh, yeah.
Is it just me that's getting off on this?
Oh, yeah.